DK Metcalf wants to be traded. Maxx Crosby and Zach Bond get paid. We had a bunch of cuts around the NFL and another big trade. NFL Spotlight starts now. Welcome in. It is the Thursday, March 6th edition of the NFL Spotlight Show. I am your host, Ari Meirov. Another very busy day around the NFL on Wednesday. A bunch of moves made around the league as teams get ready for the start of the legal tampering period on Monday. Every team is getting their salary cap books ready to go, ready to pay some big time money over here in free agency to players. So a lot of moves getting done ahead of that day coming up over here next week. We had a very busy day. Let's go around the NFL, talk about everything that happened here around the league. Let me bring in my good friend, Ben Allen. Ben, what is going on? How are you doing here today?
I'm doing well, Ari. Yeah, like you said, a lot going on. So let's go ahead and break this show into three different parts here. We're going to talk about extensions, we're going to talk about trades, and we're going to talk about cuts. Let's go ahead and start with the first one, extensions. And the big deal of the day, Maxx Crosby getting paid. Highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the NFL. Big time news there. Also, another guy who got paid, Zach Bond of the Eagles. They made sure they kept their linebacker there in the building. He's getting the bag after being just a flyer this past season. But let's go ahead and start with Max here. Why is his deal so massive for all of the rest of the NFL and just for him as well?
We all know, first of all, that the Raiders are starting this new era again. New head coach, new GM, Pete Carroll, John Spytek. We also know that at the trade deadline, there were these rumblings. Could Maxx Crosby get traded after the season was over? Max said, I believe it was on his own show, basically saying, I have to go and see where I'm at right now. I want to win. And of course, eventually the team hires Pete Carroll, John Spytek, and he is recommitted to the organization and feels like we're back over here. Tom Brady, minority owner, he's going to try to fix everything up over here. So he recommits, and right away they start negotiating this extension because when Maxx Crosby initially signed his first extension a few years ago, that was back when Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler were there in Las Vegas, he quickly outperformed that contract. Last year, they adjusted the contract by moving some money up to make him happier, but it was a really outdated contract. So he needed that to be adjusted over here. And this new regime wasted no time by giving him this extension on top of the 2 years that were left. Like it says on the screen, 3 years, $106.5 million over here. Now puts him under contract for the next 5 years. Highest paid non-quarterback in football. It surpasses the Nick Bosa deal, which was $34 million per year. And it basically tells everyone in Las Vegas that this is our cornerstone. We're building around him on this defense with Pete Carroll and with this new personnel staff and ownership group, which is dishing out a lot of money. We saw how much money they spent on the coaching staff. This ownership group is really putting their money where their mouth is over here. And now they're rewarding one of their main players and getting it done early. It's also very smart of them to get it done early because this offseason, Ben, is going to be the offseason of the pass rushers. And if you look around the NFL, Trey Hendrickson needs a new deal in Cincinnati. Myles Garrett, wherever it's going to be, needs a new deal. TJ Watt in Pittsburgh is going to need a new deal entering the final year of his contract. Micah Parsons, long-awaited deal for him. He needs a new contract. Aiden Hutchinson is extension eligible in Detroit. Daniil Hunter has 1 year remaining in Houston. He needs a new deal. Josh Sweat had a big Super Bowl. He's going to be a free agent next week. All these pass rushers are going to try to get big time money. And now the floor over here has been set at this $35+ million that Maxx Crosby got. All those elite guys that I just mentioned are going to try to surpass that number on their new deal whenever that time comes. So this was the first of what should be many extensions over here this offseason for the pass rush market, which I do believe will eventually reach $40 million per year.
It's insane. Just absolutely insane. All right, let's talk about the other guy here, Zach Bond, sticking with the Eagles. What you got there?
I mean, the Eagles, we know they have so many impending free agents over here after winning the Super Bowl. Look at Milton Williams, their defensive tackle, Josh Sweat, the pass rusher. We just mentioned him. Their guard, Mekhi Becton, is going to become a free agent. I believe they are prepared to lose Milton Williams and Josh Sweat. They're going to allow, from what it sounds, to let Mekhi Becton see the market that he has. The one player they did not want to lose and really could not afford to lose was Zach Bond. And there's been this long history in Philadelphia with their GM, Howie Roseman, of not paying off-ball linebackers. But Zach Bond came in last year. It was him and Devin White, who they signed in free agency with the intention of you guys battle it out for who's going to be the other starting linebacker on this team. Zach won it 1 year, $3.5 million with incentives, and he became one of the best linebackers in football, was an all-pro this past year, a true sideline-to-sideline linebacker, a perfect scheme fit for Vic Fangio. And the Eagles, what they basically realized after winning the Super Bowl is we can move on from Josh Sweat. We have other pass rushers. We can move on from Milton Williams. We have Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Like, we got guys there. We can now lose Zach Bond. We don't have a replacement on this team for Zach Bond and what he did for the Vic Fangio defense. So they worked over here over these last couple of weeks. It sounded like in Indianapolis at the combine that they were moving closer and closer, and Bond did not want to leave Philadelphia. So he gets this 3-year contract, which means he'll do 3 more years and has a chance to get back to the negotiating table very soon. $51 million, that's $17 million per year. That makes him the 4th highest paid linebacker in football. So it's a win-win for everybody. And Vic Fangio, their defensive coordinator, is a very happy man because the bond that he had with Zach this year and for that defense, which was so great, Zach was a pivotal part of that. They just could not afford to lose him, and they got the deal done. We just spoke about Maxx Crosby and the Raiders. Had he not gotten a deal done with Philadelphia, I do believe the Raiders would have been very aggressive at getting Zach Bond, but that is now off the table. He's back in Philly.
All right, let's move on to the trades. The first item is really more of a request than it is an actual trade. DK Metcalf is looking to get out of Seattle, and the Seahawks seem like they're going to be able to work with him on this. The other move that took place that stunned a lot of people, particularly, I guess, some Chiefs fans, but shouldn't when you really look at the numbers, was Joe Thuney getting traded out to the Chicago Bears for a 2026 4th-round pick. Which of these pieces of news between the two was more surprising to you?
I would say the Joe Thuney news, which was actually a trade that got done, was more surprising, even though we probably should not be that surprised. But I just remember going back to last year. I remember speaking to somebody, and it was like, we're going to extend Creed Humphrey, and the next year we're going to extend Joe Thuney, and we're going to let Trey Smith walk. They flipped it over here, where they extended Creed last year, but they tagged Trey Smith, and now they're going to allow Joe Thuney out the door over here. And he's been an exceptional player. They love Joe Thuney in Kansas City. He was kind of the team MVP this past year because his natural position has been left guard in the NFL. He could play really all over the offensive line, but they kicked him out over to left tackle this year because the option they had to start the year, Wanya Morris, their 2nd-round pick, as well out of BYU, who I struggle to pronounce his name, so I won't even try. They both did not pan out at left tackle. So they kicked out Joe Thuney, and he really held his own throughout the year. So he was a really important player for them. But like we said, Creed is the highest paid center. They just tagged Trey Smith at about $23 million. That already makes him the highest paid guard in football. They're going to try to extend him off that number. So if an extension gets done, he's going to be the highest paid guard in football on a long-term deal. You just cannot have 3 super high paid guys on the interior. And Joe only had 1 year left on his contract. I believe it was about $16 million. So he needs a new deal. And once this deal gets processed, the 4th-round pick in 2026, he'll end up in Chicago, and they're going to work on an extension with him over there. And of course, they have money to spend. And from Chicago's perspective, the other day they traded for Jonah Jackson, the guard from Los Angeles, took on his entire contract. Now they go out and get Joe Thuney, and now they have solidified both guard spots over here in front of Caleb Williams. Keep in mind, Ben Johnson comes from Chicago, from Detroit. He's now in Chicago. But Detroit had one of the best offensive lines in football during his time in Detroit. And that is really where it all starts for a Ben Johnson offense. So this is where they're attacking over here. 2 big trades, getting the interior offensive line. And now you have Braxton Jones at left tackle. You're going to have Joe Thuney at left guard, Jonah Jackson at right guard, Darnell Wright, their former first-round pick, at right tackle. The center position is still up for grabs, but I do believe they're going to address that over here in free agency. Drew Dahlman, the Falcons free agent center, probably the top center on the board. I think he could be an option in Chicago. Josh Myers, the free agent center from Green Bay, could be an option. They really want to solidify this offensive line, and they basically now have 4 out of the 5 spots ready to go over there in Chicago.
All right, let's talk about the other move, the request. DK Metcalf. We saw Tyler Lockett get cut earlier in the day. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But it seems like that wide receiver room is going to be shrinking down to just Jackson Smith and Jigba. What did you make of this request? I know this was something that you weren't totally shocked by. There's been these weird rumblings, but what insight can you give us as far as what's going on with DK Metcalf and what we should expect moving forward?
I mean, we touched on DK Metcalf a couple of times here on the show over the last couple of weeks, and basically there were the reports or rumors last week that there was talks with the Packers. That wasn't necessarily true, but the week before we did our Tuesday edition of the cut candidates coming up and trade candidates, I mentioned there's something weird going on with DK Metcalf, and I mentioned that inside that building they like him and they want to keep him, and he's a young player and he has 1 year remaining on his contract and he needs a new deal, but there's just been something there. It reminds me, it's not the best example, but I remember before the season started, like Jahan Dotson in Washington was traded. It was like this guy was a first-round pick a couple years ago. Something just smelled fishy, and of course, he was traded to Philadelphia like a couple days later. This is what it's felt like with DK Metcalf, where it's like good player, like young guy, wide receiver, everything is good. Like, why would something be wrong there? But something has been feeling fishy there. And now we get this news that he has requested a trade, and he went over to the building on Wednesday, and he and his new agent, he hired a new agent over here the last couple of months, basically officially made this request. And from my knowledge, there has been this thing going on for now a few months. I mean, going back to the trade deadline, there were talks about behind league circles. I caught wind of this, that the Steelers were trying to trade for DK Metcalf and reunite him with Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh because they needed another guy over there. They only had Van Jefferson and George Pickens. They wanted another guy. Like, there were talks back then, and Seattle was like, no, we're not trading him. But something about DK, he's just not happy in Seattle right now. And the two sides, they basically gave permission to DK and his agent to look for a trade partner. The Seahawks are also going to look into it and try to find if there is a good package they could get for him. But he has 1 year left on his contract. $18 million remaining on that deal. We know where the receiver market is right now. It's at $35, $36 million. So he's making half of that over here on the final year of his deal. So if he were to get traded, I'm sure he'll also be looking for a new extension on top of that. And the receiving market with, a potential deal for Jamar Chase coming up, this thing could reach $40 million per year at some point here this offseason. So he's going to want a new deal on top of a trade over here. But something has felt fishy, and clearly the Seahawks have seen enough to the point where they're like, you know what, we'll work with you over here on a trade. Doesn't mean we're trading you, but usually whenever it gets to this point, where you have the meeting and the agent is there and the player is there and the team meets and they all agree, let's look into this, that usually means that they're ready to step forward and do a trade. So this could be another big shakeup over here in the NFL. And there are many teams out there in the NFL who have a young quarterback who's on a potentially rookie contract who, let's get him that big time receiver like the Eagles once did with A.J. Brown, or like the Dolphins did with Tyreek Hill. DK Metcalf could be that next guy over here in Seattle if they ship him away.
And finally, let's get over to the players who have been cut. The aforementioned Seattle Seahawks made some cuts, including that of Tyler Lockett. We saw Christian Kirk get cut with the Jaguars, Gardner Minshew. The list goes on and on. There were quite a few guys there over on Wednesday that got cut. I imagine of the group that we've seen those guys, Christian Kirk probably is going to have at least a decent market, I would assume. What would you say the reality is for this group as far as what we should expect, whether they'll get picked up, this, that, or the other?
Well, let's go through some of these cuts first of all. Christian Kirk, he had a big non-guaranteed salary this year, but that was not an easy decision in Jacksonville. It's not really official yet. They have not processed that release yet. Part of it is because we know Liam Cohn, the new head coach, he has said this publicly numerous times. We're going to work with Trevor Lawrence and we're going to have Trevor involved in decisions. Christian Kirk is the best friend of Trevor Lawrence on that team. So I think they still want him on the team, but the base salary being non-guaranteed is something where they're going to want it to come down. So I'm sure it's going to eventually be processed. Maybe they're still talking over here, but you look at what the receiver market is right now. Tyler Lockett joins that group. That was a cut that was inevitable. We mentioned it a couple of weeks ago here on the show. He had a $30 million cap hit here this year. They save about $17 million of that by moving on after 10 years. One of the most underrated receivers in football. He's going to have a fresh start somewhere else if he wants to continue playing. But look at the free agent market over here. It's hard to really say which receiver is going to have a hot market because you have Devontae Adams, who was just released, Christian Kirk just released or will be released, Tyler Lockett. Then you have Stephon Diggs coming off the injury, Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, I think also coming off an injury, should have a really good market. Amari Cooper, Brandon Cooks, Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Elijah Moore, Mike Williams, De'Ami Brown. Like there are a bunch of guys here who are going to be free agents. Darius Slayton is a good player. Tutu Atwell made some plays in LA. Like there are a bunch of names here who are going to be free agents, not to mention the trade guys like a Cooper Kupp and a DK Metcalf. So this is a loaded wide receiver free agent class over here coming up. A lot of guys who are up there in age as well, which complicates things. But this could be a situation where it's very similar to those who remember the safety market last year, which had a bunch of veteran safeties who were released last year. Justin Simmons was out there, Quandre Diggs, and Jamal Adams, and there are many more names that I'm just not remembering. But their market was so slow because there were so many guys who were available. So determining these guys' market coming up next week will be a little bit complex because there are so many options out there. If Devontae Adams is asking for too much money, if you're a team, you're like, you know what, let's go to option B. There's another guy out there. So this is a market that will be very interesting to watch over here next week, just because it might go slower than expected because everyone's going to be waiting for someone to start and set the market and the price for everyone else. So those are some of the receivers that were cut. Some of the other guys who were cut as well. Gardner Minshew, no surprise. He was benched this past year after signing in Las Vegas. That will officially be processed on Wednesday. But if you're looking for a backup quarterback, a veteran guy, what he did in Philadelphia last year or 2 years ago, being the backup to Jalen Hurts, he could be back in that role. Same thing he did it in Indianapolis as well, of course, leading that team very closely to the playoffs a couple years ago. So I could see him being back in that role with a team. The starting experience in Las Vegas, however, did not work. Sam Hubbard, they're going to officially process that release, but he is retiring after 9 years. His entire career, his entire life has been in Cincinnati. Born in Cincinnati, went to school in Cincinnati, high school in Cincinnati, collegiately in Ohio State, grew up a Bengals fan, gets drafted by the Bengals, plays 9 years from them, has one of the most iconic moments in franchise history with that 98-yard fumble recovery in that game versus the Ravens a couple of years ago, the Tyler Huntley fumble. So he's going to be remembered in Cincinnati forever. This is a player who they were ready to cut. They had some trade talks with him, but he was like, I don't want to play anywhere else. I want to be here, or just I'm going to retire and call it a career. So he calls it a career, and in his statement, he announces that he's going to move forward and do some business stuff. So best of luck to a really good person, a really good player in Cincinnati as well. But this is just the start of the cuts in the NFL. There's a lot more coming up over here around the league as more teams trim players who have non-guaranteed salaries, create more cap space, and get ready for what's to come over here on Monday, which is the official start of the legal tampering period.
Yeah, one of those guys that you and I discussed is actually friend of the show, Jonathan Allen. He is expected to be cut if they cannot find a trade partner. Do you anticipate there's any chance that they actually find someone, or do you think he'll be an outright release?
I mean, Washington is hoping to find somebody, that's for sure, but this has always been trending towards a cut. I know when Deebo Samuel was traded, there was some talk of flipping Deebo for Jonathan Allen, but San Francisco didn't want to take on Jonathan's salary, so it didn't happen. So I would imagine this ends up in a cut. They're still trying to hold out hope to find a trade partner and get something for him, because Washington right now, after trading for Lattimore, trading for Deebo, they only have 6 picks in this upcoming draft. So they would like to get more picks. So they're shopping him around, but to this point, no takers for him in the final year of his contract. But the other players as well, Harold Landry, I think he'll get cut if no team takes him on in a trade. Jonathan Allen, I could see him getting cut. Jair Alexander, I could see him getting cut. These are all options right now. They're all out there. All those players who are granted permission to find a trade partner, if no trade is found over here in the next couple of days, I see them getting cut. And there are other guys out there who we have not mentioned who are also cut candidates over here in the NFL. I don't want to really bring them up by name. I mean, I'll bring up a couple of here. Von Miller in Buffalo, for example, he's out there. They have to figure out a resolution with him. I'm looking at my list over here on my laptop. There's a bunch of guys over here that we're kind of waiting for resolution on them and if they get cut over here. So there's going to be a decision in Atlanta. The Jets have to make a decision on Alan Lazard, on their punter, Thomas Morstead. There are more players over here that are going to have decisions over here coming up in the coming days and more cuts happening here around the NFL. So as always, stay locked in here on NFL Spotlight. We'll cover it. All the moves happening over here every single day on the show. And of course, on X at My Sports Update for all your instant up-to-the-minute updates around the NFL. It's only getting busier and busier.
Yeah, and like we discussed, we are going to do one more free agency preview. I guess you could say everything we've been doing lately is kind of like a free agency preview. But as more of these moves get processed and we get a better idea as to who's actually going to be a free agent out there beyond the guys that were just set to be unrestricted. So we will be recording an episode and it'll be coming out on Friday. There's obviously going to be more guys that we see probably released over the weekend. The episode that will come out on Monday is obviously going to have a relatively short shelf life, because we're going to start seeing some of those guys happening there midday on Monday. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the YouTube channel. Ari has been doing wonderful shorts for when these things are happening instantaneously. You can make sure that you're getting that information as soon as possible. It's going to be really big as we move on to this upcoming week. And then on Tuesday, we'll do a full example of everything that was going on and making sure that you guys are up to date with everything.
I mean, just be prepared. I mean, tomorrow is going to be the free agency preview. It's going to be a lot, like you said, Ben. But here on the show for Monday, I mean, we're going to have obviously the regular show coming out on Monday and then on Tuesday and everything. But we're going to be doing a lot of quick emergency shorts over here on the YouTube channel as well. Just like instant reaction, what's going on, what's next, because on Monday, just deals are going to be flying off the board. I mean, last year on Monday, I think 70 deals were already done on Monday, agreed in principle. I mean, it's just going to be flying. So this year's free agent class is weaker than usual. We'll talk about it tomorrow, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, next week, it's going to be absolutely bonkers. This is the craziest transactional week of the entire year in the NFL. It's always crazy. It's my favorite time of the year. So much going on. Teams setting up their rosters for the upcoming season as they try to compete for a Super Bowl and make their teams better going into the next year. So we will be back here tomorrow morning. Like Ben was saying, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you very much. If you're listening on Apple, on Spotify, wherever your favorite podcast platforms, thank you as well. Go watch us on YouTube as well. You can see my face and Ben's face. It's great. We have nice topic bars. We have everything over here as well. So go check it out. Hit the subscribe button, and we will be back here tomorrow morning with a free agency preview. See you all tomorrow morning.